violence doesn't have a face or a sex or anything. It can be a woman, it can be a male, and it definitely doesn't have an age.
I think being able just having some place that's safe and clean and lovely is something that victims need.
Can you come to me? I'm waiting.
Domestic violence is power and control, and the control is coercive. By law, it is physical abuse, which means a broken bone or pushing or shoving or threatening of violence to a person of any kind. But in reality, it's the physical plus the emotional, psychological, and verbal, that type of abuse. Sexual all plays into domestic violence.
One time my husband was at the window. He was trying to stab me, and I ran into the bathroom, and my neighbor heard me screaming, so she helped me out of the bathroom window. And her mom called the police, and the police got there, and he was standing in the window with a butcher knife in his hand, but just smiling. And the police just said, "Do you think you can go someplace until he calms down, or has he been drinking?" I said, "Yes, he's drunk," and blah, blah, blah. And I said, "But my son is in there." And so they said, "Well, let me see if we can get in and get your son." And they just let him stay like that.
Perpetrators are very good at isolating their victims from their support group, because if the victim gets clarity and if the victim sees that they have the strength and the support to get out, that perpetrator may lose that relationship. The victim is often manipulated and controlled by the perpetrator, and it makes it very difficult for us as prosecutors to even get through to that person.
My dad used to tell me I can come home. My mother would say, "No, I don't want you to come home. You made your bed, you have to stay in it." But she didn't know what I'd endured.
They're very timid. They have no self-esteem. They are not trusting of anyone. When they've been victimized their entire life, which can begin at childhood, then it becomes normal for them, and it takes over who they are, and they will gravitate towards someone who will probably abuse them, or they will become an abuser.
It's an insidious crime that has its tentacles not just in the relationship between the defendant and the victim, but it spreads into the family And the children who observe this behavior are more likely to commit this behavior. And the children who have to witness this abuse are profoundly affected, and it just has a way of spreading.
Leaving my home, from it not being my doing, feeling like I had to just be uprooted because of someone else's selfishness, and trying to get back into the workforce, from coming from being a housewife and not being independent, from being dependent so many years, and it's been a real struggle being uprooted. That everything is okay, you just had a bad day, just try and work it out, try and talk about things. You've had such a long life together. People on the outside don't know what's going on the inside because you look happy. They don't know what happens once you go inside.
To get out of the situation as soon as you can. It'll escalate to having you backed up against the wall, then it turns into a push, and then it's a smack, and it does get worse. And then I had a restraining order after court for a year. And this was in Ohio, but he still would show up at my house. He would show up at my friend's house. He'd watch me from across the street, and one time even jumped on the hood of my car while I was driving down the street, and the police were called, and they looked through the woods for him and everything. So it's the piece of paper really doesn't keep somebody if they want to get you.
There's a dynamic and a cycle that is very, very difficult to break, where the victim puts themselves into a situation where they feel trapped, and the perpetrator puts the victim in a situation where they feel like they can trap them. And the result is oftentimes the victim, there's a power differential, the victim doesn't have the resources to leave. There are personal relationships that are associated with the victim and the perpetrator that the victim feels like he or she can't leave that situation, and it creates this overwhelming dynamic for some that they feel like they have no options. And even though law enforcement's just a phone call away, and even though there are resources in the community, they feel like they can't reach out to those.
Law enforcement to women are like a foreign entity to them. They don't understand what law enforcement is going to do when they come to their house, so most of the time what they do is they say nothing has happened, that everything's okay. Law enforcement could listen openly and actively when they receive that call. Most of the time law enforcement, from what I have heard when I talk to them, is they say, it's just another domestic violence call, we're going to the same house, when in fact it could be something much worse.
Actually taking a moment to talk to somebody when the problem arises, they should actually actually listen and take heed to what people are saying.
They should be educated in it because they can't really do anything about something that they don't understand. I think that's a big thing that they should, you know, maybe have a class or maybe just have a task force for just domestic violence.
Well, one thing as a prosecutor that is very difficult to overcome is the perception by regular folks that the victim is part of the problem.
Because then the abuser is going to come back and they apologize and say, I'm so sorry, I blew it, and then the woman drops the charges. Now at least the state's the one that's pressing the charges against the gentleman.
A lot of people think that domestic violence is a man and woman, or maybe a child, but actually domestic violence is determined to anybody who's lived with one another. What officers can do, I've done it. I keep a victim advocate number in my phone, and I will give them their information. And let's say I'm a male officer. I come out and the woman's been a victim of, you know, whether it's a domestic partner sexually assaulted her or he just beat her and now she's scared him in. I'm going to see if I can get a female officer to come out. I'm going to see if I can get somebody else to come out there for her. Maybe she can relate better to a female, feel more comfortable with another female. And if the officer has to lock somebody up, do a good detailed report and indicate on there that it is domestic violence. So at least the judge and whoever else is working the case can see that.
Understanding domestic violence survivors is one of the most important things that we need to have in our community and around the world, because it just doesn't happen in our community, it happens everywhere.
We have to be vigilant in protecting victims who can't protect themselves.
Oftentimes when we go and we get a temporary restraining order and then we go into court, they have to prove what's happened to them. They have to face their abuser, and that's very difficult. The other part is it's very, very hard for them to get an attorney or someone that can sit down and talk to them because they don't have the finances to pay for it, and they're hoping that someone will listen and take on their case, and oftentimes it just doesn't happen. I think to reduce domestic violence cases would be training in the legal system, starting with the judges and the attorneys. I think the legal advocates get it, but basically they don't understand. I've had judges and prosecutors come to me and ask, because a lot of times the victims will recant, and they recant because they're afraid that once they get into court and face their abuser, the legal system might fail them, and then what's going to happen? So I really think that education is the best key to it.